changes in the highlighting of the line.
All right, recording in progress, and let's start admitting people.
Okay. Hello, everybody. It is 6:30. So we will start momentarily as soon as we let some more people in. Want to make sure everybody is able to listen. So I wish we had music in the background. I'll just sort of keep chatting so that you know we're here. And Dawn, you tell me when I should start, going through the slides.
I think I'm not seeing Scott yet, and we know Lisa's coming too, but I think they all know this school finance. So I think we can just get started while
Okay.
respecting everyone's time.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. And for those of you participating, we just want to go over some of the protocols for how we're running this meeting. We're asking everybody to keep themselves muted at all times, except for the 5 people who are authorized to speak when they're making presentations. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat. And toward the end of the evening, when we get to question and answer, Sarah Roberts will select questions and ask them to the panel. So I think we're ready to show you the agenda for the meeting. And here it is. So we are doing the welcome and introductions. And I'm just going to, before I continue with the agenda, I'm going to stop share for a moment and and introduce myself and the other 2 members of the advocacy team and our PTA president. So, hi, I'm Evie Hudak. I'm vice president of Colorado PTA. Dawn, introduce yourself.
I am Dawn Fritz. I'm Colorado PTA's Director of Legislative Engagement.
Sarah.
I am Sarah Roberts. I am the chair of the Legislative Engagement Committee for Colorado PTA.
And Amy Pritchard.
Hi, my name is Amy Pritchard, and I am president of Colorado PTA.
All right, we will introduce our guest speakers when we get to the part where they're actually speaking. So this is the agenda for the evening, and we hope to end by 8 o'clock. Sarah will be our timekeeper and make sure we know if we're going over our time so that we can stick to the agenda as closely as possible. And once again, I want to ask the participants to put your questions in the chat and keep yourself muted. Okay, Dawn, take it away.
All right, we always like to start our meetings and events with Colorado PTA's mission, which is on your screen. It's to make every child's potential reality by engaging and empowering families and communities to advocate for all children. And we also wanted to put our purposes up for PTA, focusing on C and F, which is part of what we're doing here tonight. It's to advocate for laws that further education, physical and mental health, welfare and safety of children and youth, and to advocate for fiscal responsibility regarding public tax dollars and public education. Next up, so we just wanted to let you all know how we get our positions on issues such as the ones we'll be discussing tonight and during the legislative session on ballot issues. And we ground our positions in Colorado PTA and national PTA's resolutions and position statements and our legislative priorities and our legislative platform. And here's just a quick overview of our positions. Which is we oppose the 2 property tax ballot issues and the voucher by another name ballot issue. And we support Proposition KK, which is the firearms and ammunition excise tax. And I think you can take it away, Evie.
Okay, so I am going to review the basics of school finance. I hope this isn't too boring or wonkish for you, but I think it's important to review this because when we hear what changes will be made if some of these ballot issues pass, you will understand more readily how it affects school finance and why we are so opposed to these ballot issues. So basically, school finance, the things you have to know about are revenue, what money comes in for school finance, and allocations and spending, what the parameters are around what we can spend and how much is allocated. And the school finance formula is basically the piece that determines how we spend money on schools. The main sources of revenue for school funding, the first source of funding is local property taxes. And we're going to be talking about them with the ballot issues a lot tonight. There also are specific ownership taxes. When you buy a car and you pay car taxes, that goes toward the local share of school funding, which you might not realize. And then the state general fund, which is made up of income taxes and some other miscellaneous revenue, is the state share. So the local share of the school for the school finance formula comes from property taxes, and the state share comes from the state general fund. Now you'll notice an asterisk after property taxes. So the next slide tells you how the amount of property taxes is determined. And this is very relevant to a couple of these ballot issues. So your county assessor determines the value of your property every other year. And it's based on the market. It's based on how much property sold for. And that's basically how the county assessor comes up with the value of a home. And that is the assessment. And so you take the valuation as assessed, the actual value, and you multiply it by the assessment rate. So we're going to hear tonight a little bit about the assessment rate. So then you get the assessed value. And the tax you pay is the assessed value times a sum of all your mill levies. The assessment rates are set by the state, which is why these ballot issues are so important. And mill levies are set by your local governments, your school districts, through elections. Other sources of state revenue for schools. There is some other revenue. It's not a lot, but the state education fund, which came into being through Amendment 23, which puts 1/3 of 1% of state taxable income into the state education fund. Some of this can be applied to the state share. We also have the State Public School Fund, which comes from school trust lands, and some of this money is applied to the state share, although legislation passed this year will phase that out. And then you have Building Excellent Schools Today, the Public Schools Capital Construction Assistance Fund, which is not for it's not for regular school funding. It doesn't go into the school finance formula. It goes toward capital construction in some places where the grants are allocated by the Capital Construction Assistance Board. There are limitations on the revenue. Despite the amount of money that comes in based on all these taxes, TABOR, the so-called TABOR Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, which is Article 10, Section 20 of the state constitution, says that the amount of revenue that we can spend as a state cannot be more than inflation plus growth over the previous year, and the excess revenue must be returned to the taxpayers. That is sometimes called debrucing if you have an election to keep it. But the legislature may enact tax credits to reduce the amount of excess revenue that must be rebated. There are limitations on how much we can spend also. This is in TABOR. Another part of TABOR says you can't spend more than you did last year, plus inflation and growth. And in bad economic times, we have suffered from the ratchet down effect when the previous year had less revenue than the year before it, and it forced the TABOR cap to go down. So the voters passed the referendum C limit, which averaged the TABOR cap over the previous 5 years to soften the ratchet down effect. We have not experienced a ratchet down in a while, fortunately, but it could happen. But legislation passed this year reduced the averaging to 4 years. Other sources of local revenue are mill levy overrides. This is extra money above the school finance formula that can be spent by a school district if their voters approve it. And it's not allowed to exceed 25% of their total allocation. Then there are local bond issues for school capital construction. There are limits on local revenue, just like on the state revenue. TABOR limits how much revenue school districts are allowed to have to spend. And if there is an excess, it must be returned to the voters unless the voters approve a debrucing provision, which most school districts have. So the school finance formula, which is a big part of how much does everybody get, it's per pupil revenue. And the state determines this formula that says how much each school district gets for each pupil that they have. The base is the minimum amount, and it's required by Amendment 23 to go up every year by the rate of inflation. And then above the base are factors, and there have been some changes this year in the factors. So how it is paid for is the state share supplements the local share to add up to the amount of per pupil revenue that is mandated. But there can be limitations on it. During the recession, the Great Recession, we started adding a new factor, the negative factor, or the budget stabilization factor, which over the decade it was in place, cut school funding to a total of over $10 billion. And we have never paid that back, and there is no way that we can pay that back at total levels of revenue, but we did eliminate the BS factor this year. So whatever the school finance formula says, whatever the school finance formula says everybody's supposed to get per pupil, they will now get and not have part of it cut by this negative factor. And the school finance formula is actually part of total program funding, because there is another bunch of money called categoricals that districts get in addition to per pupil revenue that they can use for certain needs. And so it used to be certain things, and special ed was moved into it this year. But it's just a set amount of money allocated to each district. It's not per pupil. And then how do districts use the funds that they get? They have local control, guaranteed right now by Article 9, Section 15. One of the ballot issues will possibly change this, but right now our Constitution says school districts decide how to spend all the funds, and they're also in charge of hiring staff, determining curriculum, constructing and maintaining buildings, and implementing all state education laws. However, there is an exception, and that's charter schools, because districts pass on the per pupil revenue to their charter schools, who then their boards decide how to spend their money according to their charter. So that is an overview of school finance. And again, you can put your questions in the chat to ask later. And now I am going to go back to the agenda. So you will see that I'm going to be turning this over to Scott Wasserman. He's the Chief Advisor to Coloradans for Local Communities, and he will talk about initiatives 50 and 108. And then when he's done, we'll turn it over to Lisa Weil, a Colorado PTA board member and director of Great Education Colorado, and she will talk about Initiative 138.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Evie. Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Wasserman. Thanks for that introduction, Evie. Yeah, I have the, I guess, misfortune of presenting to you on initiatives 50 and 108. And Evie, question is, can I take questions immediately after my presentation? I don't want to screw up your agenda, but I have to go after I present. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. And then, of course, you'll be in Lisa's good hands, and I'm sure she can answer a lot of the questions you all have. Let me share my presentation. Okay. All right. Well, as I said, misfortune of talking to you about these two measures. First and foremost, actually, let me go to slideshow. Right. So, as Evie said, Coloradans for Local Communities is who I am advising right now. We are the issue committee opposing initiatives 50 and 108. First of all, I can't give you the entire story of how we got here. That story really starts in 2020 with the repeal of the Gallagher Amendment. One day, perhaps I'll write a small novel about everything that has occurred up till now. If you take a look here, I've got two maps in front of you. And I think that this sort of gives you a sense of the problem that we are grappling with, right? In 2023, we in fact did see very high value growth across the state of Colorado. Although one of the things I want to be really clear about, and I think is really important to bear in mind when we talk about property taxes, is that not every single community in the state of Colorado experienced the same increase in property values, right? And so on the left, you can see, huge parts of the state did not see what occurred in the mountain area and in the metro area and in some parts of northern Colorado. And as I talk about my presentation, I'm going to kind of keep coming back to this theme as to why the approach in 108 and 50 bad. The other thing is to also take a look at the other map and see that in terms of actual change of property tax revenue, there are many parts of the state that did not see huge increases. And in fact, some parts of the state, mostly rural communities or communities with lower property values, actually saw net revenue decreases, right? And in some cases, that was a result of uniform changes to assessment rate at the legislative level that cut across every single district and led to a drop in revenue because the state lowered assessment rates. So that is probably, maybe the most minimal background I could give you in terms of like, how did we get here? The other thing is that, the legislature, you will hear from our opposition, in this case, the supporters of 108 and 50, that, the legislature has just increased property taxes and not responded to the crisis. That couldn't be further from the truth. Last year, and I don't have time right now to get into all of the nitty gritty of the deal that was struck in the last legislative session. But as you can see here, it was comprehensive. The last legislative session in the final few days passed Senate Bill 233. 92 out of 100 legislators voted for it. It was a truly bipartisan deal. At least it was a deal then. It's not a deal now. And you'll see we did a number of things, right? We put a new local cap in place on local districts. So even de-Bruced local districts now have a 5.5% statutory cap on the amount of revenue growth that their community can experience. Of course, they can go to the voters to override that. I won't get too much into the school district cap. It's not that important right now. The biggest thing that we did, related to schools is that for the first time moving forward, we are disconnecting the assessment rates for local districts and school districts. And the reason we did that is because the state is on the line every time we drop assessment rates, right? The state, as you just heard earlier, has to, fill in the gap and put more money into the state share. And so one of the problems is we're trying to respond to the crisis of property taxes going up too high, too fast. But if we keep lowering assessment rates, then we're going to end up hurting state funding for schools and go back to the negative factor. So one of the things we did is we split these rates. And so you see that we now have effective residential assessment rates that are in, the sixes, right? When all of this started, our assessment rate was at 7.15. We also lowered commercial assessment rates. And the long and short of it is very easy to get lost in this chart. The long and short of it is that by the actions of the state legislature in the last session, we have cut about $1 billion of statewide property tax revenue across the state. And what I would argue is that this is what responsible property tax relief looks like. And furthermore, there's no reason why local districts can't go and lower their mills from here on out. I can't repeat it enough. Property taxes are local taxes. The state controls the assessment rate. We can do some things with value exemptions, but at the end of the day, local districts control these policies. And the other thing you'll see at the bottom here is that the state has been trying to plug the hole as we do this, right? We took $378 million from the state education fund just to make this deal work, to backfill the cuts to schools. So the state can no longer continue to use its money, which is income tax and statewide sales tax money, to plug the holes for local districts and school districts. So let's get to the measures. Okay, Initiative 50. Imagine, this is from The Simpsons, the movie, putting a giant dome over the entire state of Colorado. That is in essence what Initiative 50 says. 39 states have caps of some kind. They are caps on how much individual property value can grow. They are caps on local communities. Absolutely not a single state has a total statewide cap on total property tax revenue. All right. And so what they are saying is that all of the local districts, all 4,600 local districts in the state of Colorado, their revenue can only grow by 4% each year. This, it's insane. Okay. Not only that, they want to put this in the Constitution. As you know, once we put things in the Constitution, very difficult to come out. So, if we look at some of the impacts here, all right. So, first of all, how often has total statewide property tax revenue gone up by more than 4%? A lot. Colorado Sun put out an analysis a while back. Just 15 times in the last 60 years was total property tax revenue growth under 4%. Okay, so what this means is that maybe, and the constitutional amendment's not clear. I don't know how they think we'll do this, but I'm guessing it's something like every 1 or 2 years, the state legislature would refer a measure to the state to see whether or not local districts could have more room under the cap, right? So just think about what happens when we take local community decisions and we put them up to statewide votes. More importantly, is it pits the districts against each other, right? You're all competing to fit under that 4% cap. So now schools are competing with fire districts, are competing with special metro districts. And, moreover, we did an analysis at the Bell back when I was there, and 57% of the statewide property tax growth in the last cycle came out of the Denver metro area. This is bad news for rural communities around the state. They will absolutely get crowded out by property tax growth in other parts of the state. Finally, and there was some coverage of this in the Colorado Sun, the bond market is completely unstable as a result of this. Even the measure being on the ballot has already started to hold up housing affordability projects, infrastructure projects. Why? Because if a community gets approval on a bond mill, right, then the bond holder has an expectation of receiving revenue. Well, now communities don't know whether or not they're going to exceed the 4% limit over the state. So for so many reasons, and this morning I gave a presentation to the Colorado Springs Chamber of Commerce with somebody from a bond holding, from a bond originator, arguing from a business perspective why this is just a terrible idea. So that's Initiative 50 in a nutshell. It's absolutely the wrong way to do it, puts things in the Constitution, and most definitely brings the negative factor or the budget stabilization factor back, we think, by 2032, if not sooner. Okay, that's Initiative 50. Now, Initiative 108, totally different. Okay, 50 puts a cap on revenue, it's constitutional. Initiative 108 is statutory. Okay, and Initiative 108, I guess on its face, is simple: dramatic reductions in assessment rates across the state of Colorado. I would say that these assessment rate reductions are drastic and will lead to deep, deep losses for local districts. We know that. Legislative Council is estimating somewhere around $2 billion of financial loss across all local districts in the state. But the real kicker in Initiative 108, if it wasn't already bad enough, is that it obligates, or at least it advertises itself as obligating the state to backfill all of the losses to the local districts. And so you can see the language right there. And so this is, I mean, there's no other way to think about this than the old robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? And in fact, I've heard Michael Fields, who's a proponent of this measure, say time and time again, well, local services are really popular. So we figured we would cut rates and then the state would backfill those losses and then that would be great. Well, it's not great. And so, and I'll also say there's been a new interpretation of the legislative language. And it turns out that this measure is so poorly drafted that they put the backfill requirement in a self-repealing section of state law. Now, I actually don't care, because the reality is that the legislative intent and what you see in the ballot measure right there in the title is that the state is expected to backfill these local losses. Now, even if that interpretation were correct, and for some reason, technically the state were not obligated, they still have to backfill $630 million in state, sorry, it's been a long day, in school finance costs, right? Because Evie talked to you about the rules of gravity that apply to schools. And so when the local share drops, what happens? The state has to increase its state share. So no matter what happens, if 108 passes, that's another $630 million that's going to have to come from somewhere. Whether that's the general fund now, and actually the measure is quite clear that it can't come from the state education fund. So that is a $630 million minimum hole in the state budget to backfill at a minimum school losses. And What I would argue is that I cannot see a reality in which this passes and state government just throws the cold shoulder to local districts and says, yeah, we don't care. Because this is the thing, folks. Like we live and work in ecosystems. I don't know how you run a school without a preschool program and a human services department and a higher education campus. Like our schools don't exist in vacuums. And so I think at the end of the day, 108 is just a complete and utter disaster, not only because it uniformly lowers assessment rates across the state, regardless of what individual district situations is, but then it has this absolutely unprecedented requirement that the state then backfill all of those losses. And that's going to mean cuts to higher education, healthcare, Medicaid reimbursement rates, you name it, right? And so that is what Initiative 108 does. So finally, I'll just end here and I'd be happy to take a few questions. I'd say the contrast is super clear. On the left is sort of where we are now. Property tax relief continues into 2024, lower assessment rates into the future, as I talked about. We're protecting school funding, making sure that we're not cutting schools while we also grapple with the issues in other local districts. And then finally, like we did put responsible revenue growth caps in place. And on the right is just a disaster. Massive confusion over how this 4% cap is calculated and projected and how it's implemented. Constant uncertainty about whether or not we're under the cap, whether we're over the cap. The lobbying by local communities is going to be out of hand because every single year, local communities are going to have to beg the state legislature to give them enough capacity under that cap. And then finally, just massive cuts, whether it's at the local level and the state level, it really is going to be a disaster on every level of government. And so, I'll just close by this to say, we're not saying at the campaign that, we don't have to do something about property taxes. We think that Senate Bill 233 was responsible property tax relief. There was sacrifice in that measure. And we think local communities have more to do. But, as a friend of mine said, just because you had a bad day at work doesn't mean you go home and kick your dog. This is not the way to cut property taxes. It's bad policy. And what we're seeing is a pretty unified coalition that's coming together. We're seeing the business community fractured. Many groups in the business community don't think this is a good idea. We've raised at this point a little over $1 million. We just got another commitment for about $1 million. We think we could win this campaign, but it's going to take everybody leaning in and participating. I know there's a lot of hubbub about a special session. Happy to take some questions on that. But I will say these measures must be averted. They are a total disaster, and it's not at all the way to conduct property tax policy in the state of Colorado. So with that, feel free to go to our website. You can see it here, coloradansforcommunities.com, and happy to take a few questions. Thanks.
All right, it looks like we have a few questions in the chat. Evie's asking you to review what other local districts rely on property taxes besides school districts.
Sure. And actually, and I should have put the ballot title in the measure because the title, because of some changes we made in the legislature, actually tells you what they are. So counties, water districts, school districts, fire districts, health districts, river districts. You'd be amazed if you look at a map of all the districts across the state of Colorado, and this is really a product of Tabor, we have almost 5,000 districts across the state. And I think this is actually why the business community has reacted the way they have. I mean, health districts support hospitals. You have a number of higher education institutions, Ames College and Community College, as well as Colorado Mountain College, relying on special districts that fund them. So, yeah, it is truly overwhelming when you see the number of local districts that have been created and rely on a formula, right? Which is assessment rate times value times mills. And so when we mess around with these assessment rates, you are now messing around with math formulas in 4,600 districts.
We go on to the next question. I'm going to make sure I understand because it's taken me a few times of seeing your presentation to understand this. So I just want to make sure I understand. So like I live in an area that has a metro district. So if my metro district raises the taxes under Initiative 50, that means that other districts will have to cut or not be able to raise if they need to because everything falls within that 4% cap.
Yeah, and it's the more I've learned about this, believe it or not, I knew nothing about property taxes 3 years ago. The more I've learned about this, it's not even just tax increases, right? It's natural value growth or even new development. And in fact, I saw a chart today that showed we have a biannual assessment cycle. Revenues go up on the odd years when there's no new assessment because somebody built a new development, right? So that 4% cap has no carve outs. It's really one of the most sloppily drafted amendments I've ever seen.
So new development and new metro tax districts that are created from those also create a ratchet down effect for everybody else because they're
right. Just crowds them all out, right?
And I guess, what are the proponents of these measures saying about why these are necessary?
I think their argument is property taxes have gone up dramatically and outpaced wages. That's not necessarily true, but and that something has to be done, and that we need to cut and cap property taxes. And I don't think that any of us disagree per se. I think what we are disagreeing is over the how. You would have to hear from them, their explanation of why they think this is the right approach. But their argument, pure and simple, is the legislature has not acted, and that that cutting and capping property taxes is the only way to fix this.
And we're actually ahead of schedule for once, which is amazing to me. I don't think that's ever happened.
Schedule, so thank you.
We gave it 2 times. But so I might open it up for people to raise their hands, but I do have one more question about the special session. I know they're on it's on a tight line to be called if it's going to. And I guess my question is with Senate Bill 233, it seemed like everybody came to the table and was in agreement, and then they're like, oh, never mind, and decided to go through. So what's to prevent that from happening again if we come to the table again?
I think that's precisely the dilemma here. I mean, there's a number of issues. First of all, the proposal that was put forth for stakeholders to look at, I mean, still needs to be scrutinized. There are a number of technical issues. So I've read in the press, I keep reading the deal, the agreement. There is no deal. There is no agreement. There is a framework that the other side has said they're willing to entertain to withdraw their measures. I think legislators have a tough choice to make here. On the one hand, I think we have a competitive campaign, and trust me when I say I would love nothing more than to beat these measures. And I think we could do it. I think the polling looks good, and I think we could probably get the money. Having said that, there's this risk, and I think the governor's office in particular is concerned about that risk. As I just showed you, I mean, this would be destructive. But I think legislators have to decide, are they rewarding bad behavior? I mean, back in my day, you ran a ballot measure strategy and you got a deal in legislative session and you went home. Now, the new rules, if this happens, is you get a ballot measure, you do your best to try to get a deal in the legislative session. Republicans and Democrats agree, and then you say, we're going to keep going, and then you try to milk it for more. And I think, as Christopher Kennedy, the new president of the Bell Policy Center in the paper said, like, that's a moral hazard. And I have talked to many legislators who've said, like, we cannot reward this activity. I guess for me, like, I could argue all sides of this, and I have over the course of the last 72 hours. Personally, there's no reason to go into a special session. None of the changes that we're talking about affect the 24 property tax cycle that we're in. There's no reason we can't make these changes. If you ask me, I believe these guys have barked themselves up a tree and they don't know how to get down. They have a lot of sunk costs. They've spent millions of dollars to put these measures, but I also think they understand that they are holding radioactive measures that, as one person, I was talking to about this, said, if they win, they lose. So great, you won. Congratulations. There's a $2 billion hole in the state budget, and now we have to fix it. So, I mean, this is very political. I feel confident that we could win this campaign. And I also feel confident that the deal that's being talked about, it might not be that harmful, but then that raises the question for me, like, that's what this was all about. You put us through all of this so that you could get, however much additional cut. So I think we're in a very awkward situation where the proponents need to save face. And I think legislators need to figure out just how far they're willing to go to satiate them. And, this is a game of chicken. I'll probably guess for the rest of my life whether or not it was a head fake or not. I believe it is, but there's just no way to know. And unfortunately, not we, right? But like, the people in charge can't risk it. I think that's the problem, right? Is like, and so I think there are real dilemmas here. Having said that, I feel like, we should take them on and fight.
And are there any other questions for Scott before he has to go? Feel free to raise your hand and.
Well, no, I asked people to put the questions in the chat, and I'd like to continue with that policy, if you don't mind,
Okay.
because we can't see all the people raising their hands, so.
So you have any other questions? Put them in the chat.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I'm easy to reach. Evie knows how to find me. And so like if you have questions, please let me know. What I would ask, and so sorry, I didn't even do the traditional, ask, right? We need your support, right? I don't know what's going to happen over the next week, but we're building, I think, a pretty ideologically diverse coalition. We're going to need all hands on deck. We are going to need every sector, early childhood, K-12, higher education. Everyone needs to talk about how destructive this is, how this undermines our funding system, local control. And so we need you. I know you'll learn more about how you all can get involved and advocate, but I would say your voices, your local voices, are key to winning this campaign. So thank you. I hope you will oppose these measures, and look forward to working with you on the campaign. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for coming and explaining it to us again. Every time you give this presentation, I feel like I learn a little bit more about how terrible everything these are.
Same here. Anytime. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Yeah. And I do want to be clear before Evie, you'll pop on in a second, that PTA opposes these, and we're gonna give you some rules related to what actions you can take in your schools if you're part of a local unit at the end of Lisa's presentation. So over to you, Evie.
Okay, so Lisa Weil, I introduced you a little earlier. So you are welcome to begin your presentation.
All right, thank you so much for the opportunity. As they said, I'm Lisa Weil, I'm the Executive Director of Great Education Colorado, and a board member of PTA for, I think, 7 years now. And I just want to say what a critical partner Colorado PTA is in local issues, but also these statewide issues. Colorado PTA was critical in the passage of Amendment 23, which we passed in 2000, and we'd be in much, much worse shape in school funding if it hadn't been for Amendment 23. And so I've always been very proud and excited to be a member of Colorado PTA and the advocacy that only PTA can bring, having the local units and folks who believe in our vision of and mission of one every child, one voice. Great Ed's vision, and I think the reason that PTA and Great Ed work so closely together is that our vision is that because of public education, we have a state where every student, regardless of their zip code, learning needs, language, identities, the color of their skin, that every student can graduate, lead their best life. And we do that by creating networks and coalitions like PTA has been one of the anchor coalition members in everything that we've done to try to create equitable, sustainable, and adequately funded public schools so that every student feels welcome, seen, safe, supported, challenged. And it's just a different way of saying what PTA's mission and vision is. Now, contrary to that is Initiative 138. It is billed as a right to school choice, and this is the language right here. I'm just going to read it because it's this simple. It establishes the right to the constitutional right to school choice for children in K-12, declaring that school choice includes neighborhood, charter, private schools, homeschooling, open enrollment options, and future innovation, quote, future innovations in education, which could be Joe's Bar Grill and K-12 Emporium for all we know. The key thing here is that parents already have these rights, right? Parents already can decide to homeschool. They already can decide on a charter or a neighborhood or a private. So if those rights already exist, why would we need to put them into the Constitution? And the answer kind of comes in what I think was just a very honest question. Somebody actually from the ACLU was approached to sign the petition when they were out in Denver a while ago. And the person asking them to sign said, if this passes, your kid can go to private school for free. And that is what it's about. The goal is the gateway to vouchers. This is part of a movement, a plan that has been in effect for really decades. And it's a goal, it's the playbook for privatizing our schools. The first thing is to defund our schools. In Colorado, man, we are ahead of the curve when it comes to defunding our schools and not giving our schools enough resources to be able to succeed. So then you get to say, well, our schools are failing our kids. Our schools are failing kids with disabilities. Our schools are failing these kinds of kids, when in fact, our schools are being set up for failure by our state's failure to fund our schools adequately. We are $2,000 to $3,000 per pupil behind the national average, depending on how it's calculated and if you take the cost of living into account. And so all of America really is underfunding its schools, Colorado in particular. And just one statistic that I think is important to walk away with is that the wages, teacher salaries in Colorado are literally the least competitive in the nation. If you decide to be a teacher, you're basically accepting a 33% cut in salary from what you could make in other jobs for which you are qualified. So that's number one. Number two is to distract. We talk about CRT. We attack certain students. We talk about books that kids shouldn't read. We focus on things that will divide, that will make people who believe in public education think, well, is that what's going on in my schools? So that's the second part. And the last one is to just take that next step and privatize. It's to create a voucher system so that education becomes not a public good, not the thing that our communities do together to make sure that our kids are ready to be citizens and entrepreneurs and leaders so that our communities can thrive. The goal is that it's a commodity, and the consumers of education are the parents. In fact, the American notion is that we are all the beneficiaries of a strong public education system. And I'll show you in a minute that most people in Colorado agree. Colorado's a tough place to create a system of vouchers. It's the tough place to get public dollars to be spent in private schools. And the reason for that is our Constitution currently doesn't allow it the way it's been interpreted, but a new constitutional right could change that. The legislature isn't going to do it. We right now, at least, have a legislature that opposes vouchers and believes that public dollars should stay in public schools. So the only way for this national movement, and it's happening all over the country. Vouchers have just been taking off. It's been a long burn, but over the last few years, they've really taken off in a number of states. This is the only way that they can do it is to put a question, to put it into the Constitution. Because it's a constitutional amendment, it will require 55% to pass. If it passes, litigation will be virtually guaranteed, as what's most likely to happen is parents say, well, I have a constitutional right for my child to go wherever I want them to go. Give me my money. So Arizona went there. It's been about a year and a half since Arizona they've been working with vouchers for certain kinds of kids. And finally they went all out, and universal vouchers, anybody can ask and can say, I'm homeschooling my child, or I want my child to go to this private school, and they get a voucher. Right now, so in one school year, that took $825 million out of the Arizona state budget. And about 75% of those dollars are going to kids who have never set foot in a public school. So it's just going to the most affluent. I'm sorry about that phone. I'm not going to be able to do anything about it. The most affluent counties are getting the vast majority of this money, and the money has to come from somewhere in a tight budget like Arizona has. And so it's coming out of public schools. So what happens is public schools are less able to provide what students need, and private schools and others start saying, see, our schools are failing. You need to get out. So it is intended to be that circle. And you can see here what the impact is. These are just, this is from, if you go to SOS Arizona, this is their website. They've got a lot of great information that's basically the cautionary tale of what has happened in Arizona. So the money is going to religious schools. People are getting their vouchers and not paying it. Other people are spending it on apparently $1 million of money for Lego sets. So this is what we could look at if we are on the road to vouchers. Coloradans don't want to go there. So we did this poll in March, April of this year, and we asked first the generic question, do you think limited state education dollars should be used to fund private schools at the expense of other schools in Colorado? And 70% say no. And then we asked this question that gets to this issue of this parent choice movement. That sounds good. It's that, of course, parents should have control over their child's education. That's one frame, as opposed to the second one, that our public schools are central to the health and well-being of our communities. Everyone has a stake in ensuring we have excellent, welcoming, and successful schools. So we did an A/B test. That first test, we should be really focusing on what parents want to do for their children. That should be the top priority. And we have 55% saying, no, our schools are central to our communities, and they are a public good that all of us benefit from. So the people are with us. The money is with the folks who got this thing put on the ballot, because it had to cost probably at least $2 million to do it. So then we just asked the language, the specific language that voters would read, and we asked them, would you vote yes or no? And when you definitely yes is only 28%, probably yes 21%, definitely no 25%. So it's pretty even of the people who are not going to move, and probably no is 12%. So we're at 49% yes, 37% no. That's good news because they need to get to 55, and it's easier to move people to no than to yes usually. But they're going to have a lot of money to talk about their version of why this is a good thing. These were the best messages against Initiative 138 in order of their how powerful they were, but all of them are pretty close. The number one thing is saying when these dollars go out of the fiscal of the public fisc and go into the private world, there are no requirements of transparency. There are no requirements of accountability. Those schools and homeschoolers don't have to meet any particular standards. And so that was very powerful. Arizona's cautionary tale, just telling a really short story of what's happened in Arizona when they started giving public dollars to private vouchers. People were upset about that. The last one too is it really is the school's choice, not the parents. And so when you tell folks, and this is what's happening in Arizona, that yeah, you think it's the parents' choice, but a private school, a school that is not a public school, gets to say, you know what, we don't allow kids whose parents are LGBTQ, or we don't allow kids who are LGBTQ. We can discriminate by religion. We can discriminate by disability. If a child goes with a disability, goes to a school, they no longer have any protections. The IDEA, the individual, the special education requirements and rights that come from the federal government don't apply to a private school. A lot of what really happens when you do this as well is that kids go to a private school. They are not counted in the public schools, like what we have of the October count. And then things don't work out at the private school, and the private school can kick them right back into public school, a public school that does not get any funding for them. So Arizona is a catastrophe. This is the direction that these folks are trying to go to. And I will say they are patient, and they are, even though this does not directly create vouchers, this is paid for by the same folks who are pushing those vouchers. And this is the first step. This is the Trojan horse to get inside so that Colorado, which has been pushing back and from protecting public education, not funding it so much, but protecting public education. This is the way that they get in and they start chipping away at our public education system. So after, I will say, usually when we did not say these are the things that are bad about, or sorry, take that back. We did not have pro and con arguments. We just did con arguments. And those ones that I just told you about. And once we have informed people about what this is for and what it would do, we got it to 57% no, with 45% definitely no, which is all we need to stop this thing from taking down our public education system. Now, what are they saying? They know that saying these dollars are, this is making it possible for kids who go to private school to get public funding. They know that is not possible. They have the same funding, same polling that we do. So this is what we've been seeing. I have seen, so first, it's a big win for homeschoolers. So they'll be narrowcasting to that and saying, this is a great thing for you because why? Well, because there's going to be funding for you. So they can narrowcast to that population. The bigger thing that they're doing, and I have now seen this from two different folks have forwarded this to me, directly from Advance Colorado, which is Michael Field's organization, which has funded this ballot measure with mostly dark money. We don't know where most of the money is coming from. But what they're saying is, last year there was a bill that would have killed charter schools. That's the first lie. The bill there was a charter school bill last year that would have increased accountability and transparency and some other things. But they have turned that into the legislature almost killed charter schools last year. So we have to put charter schools in the Constitution, or else, yeah, sure, we've got these rights now, but in the future, the legislature could take it away. So that's their explanation of, when you already have these rights, why do we have to put it in the Constitution? They know telling the truth about it is not going to be popular. So they are trying to gain the support of charter school parents who, ironically, will lose money because they are public schools. So if Colorado starts spending our limited resources for schools on private schools, we are going to have a BS factor again, and a BS factor hits every school. And so this is so disingenuous because A, they're lying about what happened, and B, it's bad for charter school students too. The bottom line from all this is, if we get our message out, we will win. And that's, PTA is critical in that because of being a trusted messenger on these issues. And because it's the same thing that Scott was saying about 108 and 50, is that local messengers, trusted people, the people who folks turn to and say, there's so much on the ballot. Sarah, how should I vote on this thing? Those folks need to know what this is about. And when they do, when we have ambassadors who can talk about this, let's figure out who's paying for this. Why do they so much want to get this passed? Is it just because of charter schools, or is it because this is the foot in the door? So if we get that message out, our polling shows we will win. And the great thing about that is that we will send that message. Once again, it's been a while since they've tried. Once again, Coloradans do not want public dollars spent on private schools. We believe that our public schools are public goods for the whole community. And it's not about education being a commodity and the parents with, who can game the system at the expense of our public schools. It's good for them, and sorry, it's bad for everybody else. So this is one way that you can stay in touch if you're not already on the Great Education Colorado list. You can get there and keep your eye out for our public education voter, which is very similar to what I think it's exactly the same as PTA. No on 108, no on 50, no on 138, and we'll give you really easy ways to take action. So hope you'll sign up for the email list. We try not to fill your box, and if you are, especially if you're on this call and you're not part of PTA, please do this, because if you are part of PTA, and this is why PTA matters, you will get this information. And I will say to anybody on this call who may be in a PTO and not a PTA, this is why you do PTA. This is the difference. You are part of a network and an organization that gives you opportunities to advocate and tells you what's going on. A PTO is just a silo. A PTA is a pipeline to power for our students and for our families and for our communities. So I believe that's all I've got.
Okay, so Lisa, you can hang around for the quick Q&A time, right? Okay.
Happy to.
So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah right now, because she has very important information to tell you about how PTA does advocacy in regard to ballot issues.
All right. I saw from your registrations that a lot of you are PTA members, and so I just want to thank you for joining your PTA and being interested in these issues. It's important to remember that PTA is bipartisan. We talk about policy. We do not talk about parties or people. So here are some easy guidelines for you to remember. This will probably get shared out on our social media. We can also send emails if you want this. If you are part of a PTA, please ask to be on your back to school agenda at your first meeting, and just ask for a few minutes on on every agenda. You can share these things out. The things that you want to do, you want to rent the room and follow school policy. It goes against Colorado campaign finance law to use any school resources when you're sharing about ballot issues. So this is really simple. In most schools, you just will ask your secretary for a building use form. The fee is very minimal, $5 or $10. It depends on your school district and your school. So you just want to rent your room so you're not using the school room for free. You want to share materials from your council PTA. So if you're in Jeffco, we have a Jeffco council. We have a ballot issue that we are supporting, that we voted on as the council. All of these ballot issues we have taken a position on as a state. So those are all things that are safe to share. Answer questions, like just being here and being part of this. You don't have to understand everything, but you've probably gleaned some pretty good information. So be open to answering questions, or maybe say, I can't answer that fully, but let me, get you in touch with somebody who can. And again, stay nonpartisan. This has nothing to do with either, side of the aisle. This is how are we going to be public school voters. So again, we are not using school resources. We are not printing any of this out at school. We are not mailing anything from school or using their stamps. You don't want to send out, if you have teacher members or staff members in your PTA, you don't want to send this to their school email addresses, and you definitely don't want to send it from your school email address if you happen to be a staff member. And then again, with the partisan, we do not endorse or oppose candidates. We are not for people or parties. So if you can stay within these lines, it's not scary. It's just some things to be aware of. So if anybody has any questions about that, I can help you. And again, we can make sure that this goes out just as a reminder for all of you to follow those guidelines.
Okay. Oh,
was just
Dawn,
gonna
did you have something to add?
I was just going to say, I put a link to that graphic and a link to our more robust guidelines, more detailed guidelines related to ballot issues and candidates in the chat.
Great.
And I'm going to add one more quick thing. And as Dawn said at the beginning, all of our positions on these things are grounded in our resolutions, our legislative platform, all of these other things. So again, if you have people asking you questions about why are we saying no to this or yes to this, you can go back to those positions. You can go to what Dawn said, but this isn't our opinion. These are things that align with PTA's mission and values and all of those resolutions like we discussed. So this all has a very strong foundation in what PTA believes in and what we vote on and those kinds of things. So.
All right, so Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you for the Q&A section. There's been at least one question in the chat, and then people sent questions when they replied to the to whether they wanted to join us tonight. So I'll let you do the question asking, and then the appropriate one of us will do the answering.
Great. So I think we kind of covered the how can we promote and advocate for equitable and needs-based distribution of money designated for public education. I think Evie covered that pretty well when she talked about those different factors. Evie, I don't know if you want to get into those, like the at-risk factors or things like that, or do you think we're pretty good on that one?
I guess I would just say that the legislature tries to make school finance as equitable as possible, and that's why they made some changes in the school finance formula. So, when they're doing the School Finance Act, obviously we can advocate for amendments to it. And I think Lisa has another good answer to that question.
Well, when we're looking at 50 and 108, especially, and 138, I am reminded of some guy in Britain, some Lord of Parliament, something, created the law of holes. If you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. So that is what it means to succeed in November, to stop the digging. but we are still in a hole when it comes to public funding of our schools. So for the first time ever, the state of Colorado has joined most of the other states who have ever rewritten their school finance acts in commissioning a study to answer the question, what is full funding? What is fully funded, equitable, as the person asked? What does that look like? And in January of 2025, those reports are going to come in. And a lot of people are going to jump to it to say, what's the big number? Is it 3.5? Is it $3.7 billion? That's not what this is, the report's about. The report's about how many students should be in a classroom in a low income, the school where there's a lot of kids in low income. How many adults attending to the mental and physical health of students should be in every school instead of spread around 8. All of these resource issues that it's about not how much money do we need, it's about how do we make sure that we keep teachers in the profession, et cetera. So there's been a change to the School Finance Act to try to make it more equitable, but you can't really do equitable funding of schools unless you do adequate funding of schools. And so we're going to stop the digging this year. We're not going to let them dig deeper and dig and just have a bottomless pit, which is what 50 or 108 would do. We're going to turn those down, but then we need to start pushing our legislators to either refer a measure or we got to do it ourselves. And PTA's been part of 2 or 3 or 4 efforts to do that. And we'll never stop because it's not okay. The situation we're at where we're funding our schools at 1989 levels before technology and before the mental health crises and that is brought to us by COVID and cell phones. It's not okay where we're at, and we now will have a study to show that it's not okay. So we'll be asking everybody, and we'll be working closely with Colorado PTA on this and saying, ask your legislator, are our schools fully funded? And will you meet with us? Will you meet with your constituents to find out what the adequacy study says about what our schools need? That's our way forward to start digging out. So it's a great question. How do we do that? We're all going to have to come together and say out loud, we need more funding for our schools, and we need to spend it in the ways where the kids who need it most get the most support.
Thank you. I think we love that answer. Our next question, Karen Hobson put in the chat, and she is asking, what about charter schools that aren't under a district? Where does their funding come from? And I will let Evie take that one away.
Yes, Karen, good question, good point, because I talked about charter schools that get per pupil revenue from their school district, but there are charter schools that are not aligned with a school district. They're part of the Charter School Institute, and they don't get any per pupil revenue from a school district. Actually, the state funds them out of the general fund and gives them I believe it's the average per pupil revenue that they are given to fund the students in the Institute charter schools. It's an entirely separate system.
Thank you. Some of these, I think we've covered a lot of them, but I think if we could reiterate a couple answers, that would be helpful. Somebody asked, will we be needing to cut back on programs? Will there be teacher cuts? And I think that goes back to our local school districts and things like that. And so I think everybody individually that is here or will listen later, you can go back and ask your school district or ask your principal, join your school accountability committee, see what budget it looks like, for your individual school. But I think, and somebody else can chime in, but if these ballot issues pass, then yes, there will be cuts. There will be teachers. It's already hard to find teachers that want to come in, as Lisa already said, and work for a non-competitive salary. So if anybody else wanted to chime in.
Well, actually, there was another question in the chat for Lisa.
I missed it.
Where are these polls being taken?
That poll was done by Magellan Research, which has done education polling for quite a long time. It was 1,000 people statewide, and they do it to make sure that it is distributed according to the population's demographics and geographics of where people are. So it's a polling done like all the reputable ones done, and it happens to have, I believe, 1,000 respondents. I'll have to look to be sure, but. One other thing that I would say about what you were saying, Sarah, about the cuts, there's another thing that's happening simultaneously with all that, and that is the COVID money. It was called ESSER, but it's the money that came to the states to try to first, just get computers into kids' hands, make our schools safe for, during COVID. And then to help students recover, has done a lot of great stuff. There have been after school programs, there have been summer school programs that have just been remarkable, tutoring, all kinds of, and there will be a lot of information coming out from the Colorado School Finance Project about how were those dollars spent and what was the outcome. They're gone. They had to be spent by September of 2024, which used to sound like really far away. But that means that districts are in a place where they either have to decide to try to find other funding to keep those programs that were doing well, which means cutting something else, or they're going to have to let go of those programs. So the time to increase the pie and to fight for better funding is now.
Evie, this looks like maybe a question for you. How are mill levies created? How do they function and proceed?
Okay, so
Easy
there are
one.
all kinds of mill levies, but the initial mill levies for school funding were set many, many years ago. And then some of them were ratcheted down because of the Gallagher Amendment. And in some cases, voters in school districts raised them. And so they are no longer subject to being ratcheted down by Gallagher because the voters eliminated the Gallagher Amendment. But the legislature is trying to create some more equity for the basic mill levy that funds the local share. I'm not talking about mill levy overrides. I'm talking about the basic school district mill levies. And there is a law that says the ideal is 27 mills, and districts who had been Gallaghered down below that have a pathway to try to bring it back up. But again, the voters are the only ones who can approve any increase in mill levies because they are a tax. They are a property tax. And property taxes, because of Tabor, have to be approved by the voters.
All right. One more question I think that we'll share is how can my local unit have a greater impact, more effective voice in our school and community regarding these issues? And I think when I went over the do's and don'ts, I think it's just important for you to get on your agenda at your local unit meetings. If you'd like to join us for our legislative engagement committee meetings, we deal with a lot of these issues, and then become your unit's advocacy liaison and take this information back to your meetings and your schools, and just share our graphics, become as knowledgeable as you can, and just have those conversations. It's very easy to say you're a public education voter. It's very easy to not be partisan about these things. We're all here for a reason. We all want the best for our students. Even people that are on opposite ends of a political spectrum can find common ground in wanting the best for their kids. So I think just being open to answering questions and sharing what you can on your social media or at your meetings, I think is a great step. And just don't be afraid to have the conversations. You don't have to be an expert, but it's helpful to, take what knowledge you've gained here today and go off and learn more and talk to your community members about it.
In regard to social media, PTA is posting on our social media accounts, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, I think, X. We are posting these infographics about with our positions on issues. Feel free to share those. And also read the PTA newsletter if you're a PTA member. You get the newsletter emailed to you. Please open it up. There's an advocacy section in every issue where we go into more detail about things. And you can utilize that to share at your local unit meeting.
Okay. Are there any other questions that anybody would like to put into the chat that we could answer? We've got about 9 minutes left from what we scheduled. We'd love to answer any extra questions that you might not have had before, but you have now.
Okay, well, Dawn, why don't you put into the chat? Oh, somebody asked, will we get a copy of these presentations? We are putting this program is being recorded and it will be posted on the PTA website. So it will be available for you. And it has obviously all the slides that we showed and our conversation. And then, of course, you can join the PTA Legislative Committee meetings. And I was going to ask Dawn if you would put the legislative email in the chat. So you're always welcome to send us a message, a question, and make requests. And it's legislative@copta.org, but we'll put it in the chat. Okay, I wonder if any of the presenters have any final comments, things that you would have liked to have said.
Sure,
I just didn't get to. Dawn?
I'm just throwing things in the chat left and right here. I was gonna say, yeah, email us at legislative@copta.org. If you are a PTA member, which if you haven't joined yet for the year, you can click on the link above that I sent and find your local unit and join. Yeah. If you want to be part of us and you are a PTA member of our legislative committee, just send an email with your name and the name of your local unit to legislative@copta.org. I send a link to some of the graphics that Sarah has created for us related to 50, 108, and 138, just some simple graphics that kind of explain them and say that we oppose them. I'm also going to put let me make sure I got it.
While you're doing that, I'll answer the question that just appeared in the chat. We were going to address initiatives 142 and 160, but they failed to get enough signatures, so they will not be on the ballot.
Yeah, sorry. We just became aware of that on Monday because that was the deadline for the signature gathering. So yeah, we will be focusing on 50, 108, 138, and we also do support. Evie, give me the new name.
AK.
KK.
Proposition KK, the firearms and ammunition excise tax.
So that is the one that we do support this year. And also
And
just
your link earlier in the chat to our the document on our with all the background information about our positions
Mhm.
on ballot issues can be very helpful if you want to ever answer any questions that somebody might have. And I also want to say, for those of you who are not a PTA member and you go to look for your local, a local school of yours, and you don't find that it's a PTA, we will soon have the Centennial PTA, which is a unit that people can join, basically the state PTA's local unit. It hasn't been created yet, but be looking for it. Amy, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, yeah, I'm gonna say a couple of things. First of all, you can definitely, as a community member, you can join a local PTA, and we do have a join now button on our website. So if you are looking for a PTA that's close to you, you can search in that way. Also, National PTA has the same lookup. You choose your state and then you put in your address and it'll tell you which PTA is close to you. And so that's, if you want to join a local PTA, that's definitely an opportunity for you. But in addition to that, we will be starting a statewide PTA unit, as Evie said. And so that should be up and functional, hopefully before the end of the year. And so if you're interested in that, just keep watching that newsletter. And as soon as that opportunity is open, we will be getting it out to you. But I do want to just commend the hard work of the advocacy team. In addition to all of the speakers and all of the information here, this is just invaluable to the future of our students. And so, it doesn't matter if you live in Larimer County or Jefferson County or Grand County, all of these things are affecting all of our kids across the entire state, and even Weld County is in the same position. So having all of this really important advocacy work that we're doing on behalf of all kids in the state of Colorado, they're tireless in their efforts, and all of our students are benefiting. So thank you very much for everything that you do. Thank you so much for the difference that you're making, and thank you so much for really looking out for the things that we need to be aware of in this very important election.
Okay, we just got a question. And the question is explaining why we're supporting the firearms and ammunition excise tax. And that's because, a couple of reasons. One is we support gun safety. We feel that it's important to have laws surrounding who can purchase firearms and ammunition. But putting an excise tax on them, this bill or ballot issue will send the money for school safety programs and mental health programs. So that will really be a benefit to our students. And you can find the additional details in that document Dawn linked to.
Yeah, that link is just above the link I put for coloradopta.org to join. And it also goes to victims support services, gun violence prevention, safe and lawful gun use, and the enhancement of school safety. So just like Evie said, we support laws that protect all of us, but particularly our children and youth from gun violence. And this is one tiny step towards that and for providing appropriate services for our community.
Okay, well, I think we are done. Thank you all for attending and asking good questions, and look for this on the state PTA website in the near future, because it will be available to everybody. And that's one mechanism you can use to help spread the word. Thanks.